Do you ever wonder what it really means to be human? That beyond the routines, the masks, and the daily hustle, there's a raw, messy, and beautiful reality unfolding right before our eyes. I'm Rick Watson, and this is Humaning, a podcast where I have honest conversations with everyday humans, and together we peel back the layers, dive into the chaos, and celebrate the magic of just being human. As you listen, notice how different parts of your story may appear in the story of others as we all just do our best to live, to feel, and to connect. Welcome to Humaning. Richard Hil.
Yes,
me. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Rick. It's good to be in a room with somebody who's got a very similar first name.
Yes.
Apart from you're Rick and I'm Dick. Well, actually, nobody calls me Dick.
I used to get a bit of Richard when I was at school. Yeah. It's not my name, but...
Yeah. How did you get to Rick, in fact?
Ricky.
Ricky?
Yeah.
So it's an abbreviation of Richard? Am I right?
R-I-C-K-Y.
Oh, so that is the name?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I've just learned.
For some reason, this is a funny story. For some reason, my dad, who is not known for names or anything like that, was dead set on calling me Ricky.
Oh, really?
I don't know why.
Wow.
Because he was a cattle farmer and a livestock guy. And for some reason, he was like, yep, Ricky.
Ricky. It's a sort of jolly sounding name, isn't it?
I've unofficially shortened it to Rick for most of my life.
Oh, have you?
Yeah.
Why did you do that?
I love a nickname. I've always just called someone by their nickname.
Right.
So it's just a natural shortening.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, I feel like it's something that my mum would say if I'm in trouble. Ricky.
Oh, right. Yes. I know. Well, my actual name is Richard.
Oh, really?
In Polish, yeah. And my mother used to call me Rysio. Only when she got angry, and she would then call me Richard, and with emphasis on the D at the end. And I knew I was in trouble, right? So, but I think that, look, we won't digress into names necessarily, although it is fascinating because our names are so, wrapped up with our identities. And what comes to mind actually is my very, very dear friend, Gregory Smith, who's, you may or may not know, has been on ABC TV and Australian Stories and
I don't know.
Australian Story. And anyway, he had this experience when he was a kid. He was in orphanages.
Yeah.
And, he felt this great sense of disempowerment, being dispossessed of things and his identity stripped bare. And his name became really the only thing he felt he owned. And so now he's incredibly insistent and assertive that you don't abbreviate his name to Greg.
Yeah.
And he says, no, my name is Gregory. But it's a kind of visceral, really important thing for him in terms of his identity and who he is. It's the thing he hung on to as a child. It's the only thing he had.
Can't take this away from me.
Yeah, there was that sense.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so we normally start the podcast just with a little check-in.
Okay.
And I do it because I like to encourage people to check in with themselves and with others. And yeah, so how are you feeling physically, mentally, emotionally right now as we sit here on a Monday morning?
That's a really good question. These check-ins are quite an interesting process, actually. Well, look, they're formidable questions, particularly in the context of our lives, and particularly, I guess, set against the backcloth of my recent personal experiences. It's hard to kind of pin things down. I've got today. What do I feel today? I feel at this moment a kind of a sense of high excitability, actually, and playfulness, and
cool.
And it's almost in the face of ongoing multiple pressures in my life. And so I don't know if this is hysteria, sort of embryonic hysteria working its way through, but I think I feel quite buoyant at the moment.
Yeah.
And it's almost as if I feel I shouldn't be, but I am.
Yeah.
And so I've had a hell of a week, hell of a month, and a hell of a year.
Yep.
And some people might say I've had a hell of a life, which is ongoing. And but today, I'm okay. I'm okay and pretty calm, pretty relaxed, tired. I'm always tired,
Yeah.
dreadfully tired, because I basically don't sleep that well.
Yep.
But hey, welcome to the human race. Yeah.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
not something you suffer from,
I did last night, I'll tell you.
Did you?
Yeah. Yeah, my check-in, I physically feel like I went out and partied for 24 hours straight last night,
Really?
and I didn't,
Mm.
but I feel like it.
Mm.
Um,
You don't look wrecked.
the beard hides quite a bit.
At least you can grow one.
Yeah. Well, I've got no hair on my head, so I have to balance it out. I did the weekend in Melbourne, so I was meant to fly back at 4 o'clock in the Arvo. Flight was delayed, then it was cancelled, then I had to get another flight, so I ended up
wow.
getting into here at 1:30 this morning. So I just feel like I went out drinking last night, and I didn't get any of the fun, and feel like the after effects.
Oh no! Oh, no. Well, you seem quite buoyant.
Yeah, I'm probably doing the same thing as you, like the overcompensation.
Right.
I have a tendency to do that.
Yeah.
And I also like being buoyant and playful and fun.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's for me.
Yeah.
It's not a coping mechanism, but it's just I don't want life to be serious all the time.
Well, yeah. Well, it's dreadful when it is.
Yeah.
Because it's it appears in this very dark light, doesn't it? A dark light. Can you have a dark light? Maybe you can. Yeah. The other thing I'm mindful of, we talk about body. Like the body at the moment. My body at the moment is I can almost feel the chemicals rushing around. And but it's kind of a pleasant feeling. It's it's almost like an antidote against the opposite sense of feeling, which is being weighed down or heavy,
numb.
So I feel a certain lightness of being. Not an unbearable lightness of being, but yeah,
I like that. I like the sound of that.
The title of a book, isn't it?
The lightness of being.
Yeah, the unbearable lightness of being. I'm sure some of your listeners would know it. It's a guy called Miloš, a Czech writer, I believe.
I'm 100% sure that none of my listeners will know that.
You underestimate your readers. I mean, your listeners, rather.
Cool. So, how the hell do we know each other?
How do we know each other? Do we?
Do we
know each other?
This is going to be a fun one.
I know. I feel I do know you, actually. At some level, even, prior to this conversation or other conversations, I think there's a kind of sense of knowing about you and who you are. And I have to say, I shall embarrass you in front of the tens of thousands of listeners here, which is you're a thoroughly pleasant chap. And that's a very English way of saying that you're personable and approachable and generous of spirit, which I really like and relate to, and which is great. So do you want me to talk about how I've got to know you?
Yeah, like how did we first meet?
We first met because I've just moved to this little town, Moranbah, and somebody invited me to join a men's group. And I've never been in a men's group before. I sort of was resistant to the idea.
Yep.
Not because I thought it was a covert terrorist organisation, but
Which it has the potential to be.
It has a potential. Yeah, that's right. It might morph into one. No, I think. I was kind of resistant. I'm not sure why. I could probably work it out. I've been to some meetings where it's been largely men, and I've witnessed the dynamics occurring and the language that's often used, and I kind of slightly repelled by it. And I remember in the wake of the rise of the Me Too movement, I was invited to join a group in Mullumbimby of men, and they were roughly between the ages of 45 and 65.
Yep.
And at the end of it, I kind of came away thinking, we really need to have these conversations with women, actually.
Yeah.
And so there was this sense of, self-referential sort of nature of this conversation. We're all talking as men with each other, and I don't think that's a bad thing. It's a good thing. But in that environment, I felt that there were voices missing and people missing who should have been present. So maybe part of my resistance was that. But I guess, somebody invited me to come along. I came along, and it was at a time, as you well know, Rick, I was in a very, very troubled space.
Yep.
And so I came along reluctantly because the tendency I had was to be alone in a dark room at that point. But I came and the things that really hit me right between the eyes were the people who arrived, the men who arrived, and of course I made instant judgments about 2 or 3 who I remember straight off.
Yep.
And unpleasant judgments actually. I thought, do I really want to be? Oh, look at this person, look at that person, and not knowing anything about them. So it's a classic prejudgment of other people, which I'm always embarrassed about, but we often slip into that.
Definitely.
But until I heard a couple of the guys opening up, and I was literally stunned. I've never heard men speak in that way. So it was, and I had the opportunity to speak, and for some unfathomable reason, mainly perhaps because there was this sense of non-judgmentality, I felt I could speak safely about the feelings I was having at that point. And I remember somebody asked me to check in, and I'm not sure if it was a check-in. It was a kind of tsunami of emotions, and which I came out with. But I did feel better afterwards. But I think that's how we met. That's how we met, and I've attended the group ever since, more or less. And I've learnt tremendous amounts in it. I will speak a little bit later, maybe about other feelings about my membership, and about particularly through the prism of my age, what that feels like. And I'm grateful to you, Rick, for your fantastic facilitating and your warmth of welcome, which has been wonderful.
Cool. I'm glad. Because this is an audio and not a video, let's talk about your age, because people can't see us.
My age.
Let's start there.
Okay.
Because in our circle, we are lucky enough to have a couple of wise men, a couple of elders, yourself and Peter. And talk to me about that.
Yeah, look, I think the one thing we all share on the planet, apart from our humanity, taken in the most literal sense, is that we're all getting older. That's one thing that combines. But some of us are more along the chronological journey than others. And I'm now 71 years of age. And even saying that stuns and surprises me. And I found myself, actually, it's very interesting. I found myself recently saying I'm 70 rather than 71.
Yeah.
And it's almost like I'm kind of reclaiming that threshold and saying, I don't want to go over that.
Yeah.
And it feels, it's hard to put feelings to it. It feels scary. It feels unreal. It feels as if I'm not meant to be here at this point, and we've talked about this before, I think previously, but there's a disjuncture between your chronological age and how you actually feel. And of course then you get and what I've learned about aging is that there are many, many challenges in terms of how you see yourself and how you construct your identity. And however much people might try to pretend they're not the age they are, our identities are formed through interactions. And so what I've learnt is that my identity as an aging person, even saying that's difficult, is structured largely by my interactions through people and the constant reminders of age. And I'm, if I can just boast a little bit, I guess I'm intelligent and insightful enough to be very mindful in terms of a whole range of subtle and more obvious discriminations that occur, the subtle marginalizations that occur, the forms of language that people use with you, and the most brazen. And I found young women actually to be a lot of young women will say to me, particularly those in the service sector, will say, "Hello, young man," and it's quite often. And I'm always quite stunned by that. And I think, oh, that's interesting. So obviously you're making an observation and you've given yourself a license to comment on that. And I don't necessarily get angry about it, but I'm intrigued by it and curious. Yeah. So that's the journey I'm on. And it does feel like I'm on the last 100 meters.
Yeah.
Can
I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure. Sorry to rattle on.
No, it's good. if your chronological age is 71, how old do you feel inside?
Good question. Well, um, that's a hard one too, isn't it? I think if I was to put a number to it in terms of my body, my mind, I'd probably 40s, my 40s.
Yeah.
So I feel, and but your body does talking too, and it kind of speaks to you about the aging process. The one fortunate thing in my life, many fortunate, but one of the main ones is I've kept fit.
Yep.
I'm really fit, and I put a great deal of stock on exercise and
Yep.
physicality, and so I do something every single day. I probably drink more than I should. I don't always eat the best food. I try to have a kind of baseline of good food.
Yep.
And yeah, look, I guess if I'm to talk about what this means to me, there's two main things I want to say about where I'm at. One is it has reminded me of the great brevity of life. That's the thing. Life is so damn short, and that's the feeling I get. And from 40 to this age is a blink of an eye, and it feels incredibly short. And precious. It feels really, really precious. Secondly, and my commitment is, as far as I can exercise it, is in relation to the celebration of life.
Yep.
That life is despite all its many, 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 many hardships, and there are a few, Rick, right?
Yes, there are.
That it's worth it. It's still worth it, and there's a joyousness to be discovered. And we're in this, I feel, I don't know what people. I'm in this constant pursuit of meaning and purpose, mainly through relationships, and that's what gives me my profound sense of meaning and purpose in life, is my engagement with people.
Yeah, that's super interesting, because what I know about you is that you've had a very your life has been full of amazing achievements on a really practical, like if this podcast was about all the things that you've practically done in your life, it would take up many hours. So there's the practicality of the doing, that you've done a lot in your life, and then what I hear you now say is like this being and being connected, and that's more of an internal thing. And is that now at this part of your life creating more meaning for you than the doing and the striving, because you're an established author, so many things. Is that balance from writing a lot of books and lecturing and being an academic, is that balance now changing from the doing to more of the being and the feeling and the connecting?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I guess yes and no to that. What would I say about this? I think I had the fortune of having to do a PhD in the old-fashioned way, in the way many academics used to do their PhDs, which was, it's called PhD by publication. So what you actually do is you piece together all your publications, and then you write a report that integrates all your career ambitions, goals, and all the rest of it. And you try to find some coherence, intellectual coherence, in what is it you've been trying to say for all these years.
Yep.
And and the thing that drove me absolutely through all those years was to give voice to people who experience the vagaries of power, and particularly oppressive power.
Yep.
So, and the reason that was strong in my being was because I went to a school, an education system, and a class-based system in England, which was extraordinarily damaging, at various levels, not just for me, for many, many, many other people, and that damage was in terms of your own identity, your sense of self-worth, who you were in the world. And certainly in England, people who've lived in England know the English society, know how embedded the class system is. So we talk in upper and lower, and the lower has a real resonance, especially for the lower where I was, because I was in the lowest of the low. I went to a school where consigned kids at the age of 11. We had this exam, terrible exam called the 11 plus.
Yeah.
And if you failed it, you were consigned to a secondary modern boys school, or if you passed it, you went to a grammar school.
Oh,
Now, I, at that age, went to a secondary modern boys school, which was a terrible, terrible school. And I learned a number of things there. One was the imposition of brute power through the cane. We used to have the caning system.
yep.
And that in itself had a lot of messaging in terms of your identity. But the other was the power, the validity of your own voice. And I discovered in later life that one of the reasons I talk very rapidly, I mean, that didn't merge out the blues. I learned to speak that way. Now, the question is, why did I speak that way? And I still do. Was because I felt when I was a kid, my voice didn't have any value.
Yeah, right.
So I just wanted to blurt the words out, get it over and done with, and then just walk away. And it took me a long, long while to learn, because I became an academic,
Yep.
to learn to give lectures, to speak at conferences, to do radio interviews, and the self-doubts of being in that class system as a child and in that class-based school have worked themselves through my
Filtered
life.
through, yeah.
And it's an ongoing issue for me. You know, I've always had it. And I've talked to other people who come from that background, and they will have more or less the same sort of experience. Yeah.
So that theme of having a voice has been really strong all the way through.
Yeah, incredibly strong, incredibly strong. So, I mean, coming back to your question, I find it kind of a bit difficult to answer that. You know, I don't feel that necessarily a conscious shift towards the interior world. What's happened actually over the years is I've become much more mindful, I think, of what's important in life for me.
Yeah.
And what brings people joyousness and a sense of connection with ourselves, with others, and with nature.
Yep.
And I've discovered through the complexity of thinking about it all those years that the answers are quite simple, really, and not.
The answers of what matters most to you.
Yeah, for me. Yeah. And I think
what have you found?
Well, a sense of inner peacefulness, joy, connection with other people, enjoying nature, feeling part of something bigger than yourself, and having meaning and purpose. If I was to put together the assembly or the architecture, what I think leads to human contentedness, I think that they're some of the main elements.
Yep.
There are a lot of other things too, creativity and all the rest of it. But and I now pay a lot of attention to the things that bring me some contentment. You know, my friend Gregory Smith, who's written a book about this, a very interesting, eloquent book, prefers the term contentment rather than happiness, and I think I do too.
Yeah, I'm the same.
Are you the same?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why does that make sense for you?
Oh, I think happiness can be a byproduct.
Yeah.
And I think contentment can be consciously built.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably just that.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah. And there's a body of literature, isn't there, that says that, you know, the pursuit of happiness can actually bring misery.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that something you think?
I've definitely been exposed the last few years to more of both of the sides rather than the blanket positivity, let's be happy side of it, which probably was my first couple of decades of like just smile and, you know, get on with it and be positive and be optimistic. And I think now I've personally benefited from exploring the darker side, exploring the other side, and seeing that it's not that scary. It's challenging to, you know, spend time there because it's so uncomfortable because I was so used to the opposite. But probably the benefits that I got from spending time there and getting to know that part of me and accepting it in varying degrees, and that's still a work in progress, led to more contentment than the opposite did, leading to happiness. So I think for me, it's probably that little difference is the consciously exploring both sides rather than just the put on a happy face.
Yeah, interesting. I remember a few weeks ago, you and I had, I love this term, you said, let's go and have a cheeky beer. I love how that was a cheeky beer. What is a cheeky beer?
Well, our men's circle is pretty social, so we try to catch up and do stuff outside. And we tried to catch up for coffees a bit, and it just wasn't working. We both had stuff on. I'm like, how about we just do a cheeky
A
beer?
cheeky beer. I love that notion. Yeah,
I think it's an Aussie thing.
yeah, I have a lot of cheeky beers. But, and one thing I remember when I was talking to you is we both I remember there was one point we both looked at each other and basically said that connection is this really vital thing in our lives.
Yeah.
And I remember the look on your face, and you said it was such sincerity, and it came from the heart and the soul, whatever. And it's something very important to you, isn't it?
Definitely. Yeah. And I'm learning more and more as I go, and more into this work and the circles and study and my therapy and all the rest of it. And I'm deepening my understanding of why that is, and why that it's a real visceral experience for me. And it's one of those experiences where I feel fed rather than feel drained. And that's the key indicator for me. So, yeah, I think the contrast of that is also previous relationships, intimate relationships, where we were very good at playing our role of mum and dad and all the rest of it, but the connection wasn't there. And it's by having that experience and then having a new experience and seeing that it can be different. Having that contrast has really opened my eyes to what connection means to me. And I did a workshop down in Melbourne on Friday night, and I basically admitted to them, like, I'm a connection junkie, and not because I'm using it to.
Sounds like a good addiction.
Yeah. Not because I'm using it to cover anything up or to bypass anything. It just feeds me. To me, it's really meaningful, and it's one thing that matters most to me. And I think we spoke about my dad passing last year, and it was that time that I realised that it's that brevity of life, and what do I want? And the connection to me feels so open and freeing because it's not a fixed thing with an agenda and all the rest of it. It can turn into that, but if you don't catch it, but it's got so much room to move, and I love that. I love being surprised by a connection. I walked away from this workshop down in Melbourne on Friday night. I knew 2 people when I walked in, and I felt so connected to most of them after sharing and doing some work together. And within 3 hours, a room full of strangers felt like I had some connection to them. Maybe it was 1 or 2 things, but there was something there, and the collective connection was, it was a lot. And
it's a wonderful feeling. Like
it's great.
It's the most beautiful thing, isn't it?
And I think it's probably at the core of why I run a men's circle. And it's not so much, partially that's selfish because I want the connection, but it's also I understand how much I've benefited from the connection of a regular group. We could not have anything planned every Monday night and we would still leave here feeling connected. You know what I mean? It's just the shared experience of people and building the layers of it.
That's a question I wanted to ask you, actually, which is, how do you, somebody sent me something a couple of days ago, and it was, I can't put my words to this, but it was a statement or a document which had all these kind of trigger words, and one of them was connection and community, and most of us can say, that's something which is pleasant and sounds pleasant, and it's a good thing to be. It's a good condition to be in existentially, and to feel connected. But I wrote this screed in response, actually, and I said, well, how do we know? How do we know when we're connected with somebody? How do we really know? And I was just mindful of Johann Hari, who's written that wonderful book called Lost Connections. I'd recommend all your listeners read it. There was an interview he did the other day, and he talked about some survey evidence where people were asked, I think it was in the UK, that if you were in the middle of a crisis, how many friends could you turn to help you, genuinely turn to help? And he said over the years, it's gone down from 5 on average to 1. and in many cases, zero.
Yeah, right.
So people got nobody. And I guess this is the point I want to get to about this, which is we live in an increasingly fragmented society.
Yep.
For reasons we're becoming aware of, not least social media, which has the illusion of hyperconnectivity, but in fact separates people out in a whole range of complex ways.
Yep.
So this, and we know, don't we, that physiologically and psychologically this has real effects.
Yeah.
So what I'm wondering is this sense of connection, not only its importance spiritually and emotionally for us,
Yep.
but is there a broader picture to that for you?
Yeah, there is. And I have a really simple rule of thumb with it. I think before I get to that, when I'm thinking about connection, I often think about what's the opposite. And for me, disconnection was been a big part of my 30s and early 40s.
Okay.
And then to move into what this rule of thumb is, for me, it's, do I feel seen by that other person? And it doesn't have to be on something really big. Just be like, yeah, I had a flight that got delayed and I was tired. Like, it doesn't have to be a 10 out of 10 drama. It's just the other person going, oh yeah, I really feel you on that. It's that really simple art, which is not actually that simple sometimes, of listening with presence and acknowledging that you feel and see the other person. And that can be done on the simplest level. But there's also a lot of things that get in the way of that. There's a lot of egotism and a lot of stuff that rolls through the head of, how do I need to show up here? I'm thinking about my response before I'm finishing listening to what you're saying, and therefore by doing that, you don't feel seen or heard. So there's lots of little things that can get in the way. But for me, that simple, do I feel seen? And if it's a yes, I feel connected. And if it's a no, I notice it. And it's not good or bad. It's just like I just notice if that's there or if it's not. Yeah.
And how does that feel when it's not there, when that sense of connection is there? How does it experience bodily and psychologically?
I think if I do the reversed question, how it feels when it is there is probably what I can answer. It feels peaceful, and it feels calming, and it feels like I've got full permission to be myself. So that's what it feels like when it is there. When it's not there, it's probably noticing a little bit of, maybe not agitation, just a little bit of energy in the body, just the missed opportunity. And I'm, part of my default is that in the past I've been a people pleaser of wanting to make sure that I am liked and the other person is sorted and all the rest of it. So I'd guess, which I'll change that word for I'd know, that part of me would probably, show his head and be like, oh, is there something you can say to please this person? So yeah, there's some tricky ways that I've noticed about myself that if it's not there, my secondary action will try and search for it or try and create it.
It's intriguing, isn't it? I asked somebody this morning, I said, because they were talking about their loneliness.
Yep.
And when I asked them, I said, how did that loneliness feel? And the person couldn't answer it, actually. It's quite interesting. And I think that's one of the problems we have in the society we live in, and which I think, some people, Johan Hari has said, for example, that we are one of the loneliest generations who've ever lived.
Yeah.
And I think that's patently obvious. I mean, you just have to look at the mental health crisis, you have to look at levels of depression, anxiety, and all the rest of it. And these are intimately connected to the nature of our world that we live in. And I know, actually, you know this very well, Rick, about my experience about having moved from a place 30 k's away or whatever it is to a new place, and the emotions that's generated in terms of disconnection. And I can truly say that having left a place where I felt very connected to coming to a new place where I feel, even now, I feel quite disconnected still after several months. it's not as if I haven't got contact with people, but it's the quality of the relationship.
Yeah, it's the depth
And
of the connection.
and and that's what I'm really mindful of. And it's like what deepens relationship. It's not simply that. Well, I mean, part of the story, I guess, is what you're saying. You feel noticed.
Yep.
What's the word you used? Didn't know.
Seen.
Seen. Yeah, I
Yeah.
like that. You feel seen or noticed, and you get the sense that somebody cares. They care about what you think and feel, and they're going to be involved in that at some level, some discursive, emotional level. They're going to be involved in that, and they're going to follow up. And I asked my wife about this actually. I said, "How do you know when you feel connected?" She goes, "Well, one of the key markers is availability. That person is available in
The
your
willingness to
life.
show up. Yeah.
They want to show up." And I utterly get that.
Yeah.
And my experience here in this new place has been that the tenuous nature of that availability. And it feels like I've got to work on it, and I'm nervous about transgressing. I'm edgy about not feeling too needy. And somebody called me needy the other day, and I said, "Wow, that's a really interesting term." And I said, "You're right. I am. I have needs. I have needs."
I think we all are.
I think we're all needy,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Do you share that?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I have needs. I get grumpy when they're not met.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to ask you the same question. Like,
Okay.
you've just expressed that there's a situation where you've recently moved up to Moolumbar and there's slowly building connection, but it's in no capacity to the depth of the connections that you had in your old community. What does that feel like? Because that's essentially that question around what does disconnection feel like?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. The reason I have a certain reluctance around answering it is because it evokes such emotion. And I have to say, I've had many a night lying here in bed wondering, what on earth have I done?
Yep.
What on earth am I doing here? A sense of grief
Yep.
and loss around the relationships I had, even though it's half an hour down the road. And there's that sense of parting from familiar place to a place where I'm back into the world of the tenuous, trying to reestablish relationships, reaching out to people. Sometimes people take your hand and pull you in. A lot of times they don't. They'll let you go.
Yeah.
I think age is partly a function of that. There's also, I think, the unsaid and the unseen, and it's what you exude. There's something you exude, I've quoted this before. There's a wonderful U2 song called, I think it's U2. I think it's a song called "So Cruel," and it talks about not neediness. What's the word? Desperation. The notion of desperation. Desperation will get you every time. And if you have that sense, that something emerges in you that wants the relationship.
It's an energy,
almost too much, and people are slightly pulled back and repelled by it. Have you ever felt that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's
glad somebody else does.
Well, I just think it's part and parcel with the process of building the layers of connection. Because you might meet someone down the street that you have a good 2-minute chat to, and then it's like, oh, let's change numbers and catch up for coffee, and then so there's like, oh, cool. And then you might catch up for a coffee and it deepens a little bit, but then you might ask to go for another coffee and then they don't respond.
Yeah.
It's like it's just the slow dance of the building the connection.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, I love that. Actually, the slow dance, and there can be disappointments, right?
100%.
You can have a link with somebody. I've had two experiences here where one person in particular, I felt this enormous rapport, and I thought, oh, thank God, I've met this person. I feel connected. Oh, is this great? And then there was this immediate pullback.
Yeah.
And I was mystified by it. I went, oh God, what's happened there? Until I kind of realized something about this person and how they operate in the world.
Yeah.
And because we make all sorts of assumptions, some people can have personas which are warm and appealing and they can draw you in, but the nature of their lives or the decisions they make how to live their lives don't accommodate you.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily readily accommodate you.
Yeah.
And I think, if I look back to the friends I have in Mullumbimby, for example, they're the most unlikely, in some cases, group of people that I would have befriended. When I first met them, the fallings out, didn't like them particularly, but it was a deepening over time.
Yeah.
And those conversations which are it's being seen, but it's being seeing what's in it, what's in your interior world,
Yeah.
and sharing that and empathizing with it,
Yeah.
and being part of that. Yeah, and being available and caring.
Yeah. And I think that's part of what we're trying to do this year in Circle, isn't it?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
we focus a lot less on advice and rescuing, and when a man is speaking,
Mm-hmm.
and we focus a lot
Yeah,
more on,
yeah,
can we resonate with what are you feeling when that man is talking?
yeah, yeah,
And to
yeah,
me, that's
yeah.
the practical
Mm-hmm.
example of feeling seen,
Mm-hmm.
because it's, as you're speaking, I'm not coming up with a strategy of how I can fix it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually having the awareness and the presence to feel what I'm feeling while your words are coming out,
Mm-hmm.
without needing to change it
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
fix it or do anything. And
Mm-hmm.
that's like, oh, when you said that bit about moving up from Mullum, it really got me.
Mm-hmm.
That shows that someone's listening,
Mm-hmm.
and it shows that
Mm-hmm.
you've been heard,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I think in our society, especially in our gender, we can have a propensity to, whether it's conscious or unconscious, want to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's
And
very interesting. That's really interesting. I
mm,
think you're right, actually. I think you are right. And I think what most drew me in observationally when I first came to the group was just the listening to how people were speaking. I was so intrigued by the language,
mm,
and obviously the learnt capacity to articulate these very troubling things called emotions.
yeah,
And we look, the human language cannot accommodate the complexity of human emotion. It just can't convey it. But I tell you what, if there's a group I've been in, it's this one, which tells me about how some people, and I'm thinking about one person in particular, who they've learned over time how to, rather than just react at a very visceral bodily level,
yep,
to respond in a very intelligent way.
yeah.
And
It's beautiful to watch, isn't it?
Oh, it is a beautiful
It's
thing.
wild.
It really is a beautiful
Yeah,
thing. It's heartwarming. There've been many times I've nearly been in tears
yeah.
listening to people. You know.
And I think that's the value of having a space that feels safe, where you can just say what's happening in your world, whether it's in the practical or the emotional, and not feel like someone's going to fix you or you need to be different or judge you.
Mm,
I think
mm,
it's
mm. It's true. It's true, and I think
very rare
very rare, very well in the course of life, everyday
for
life,
men. Yeah,
and part of that response I gave to that statement, which I was talking about earlier, about people are throwing out terminology like connection and community.
yeah,
I mean, but the reality of it and how we work it um, through repeated practice or repeated engagement is an entire. And I think I do think in this world. With social media and all the rest of it, we know there is a diminishing capacity to talk about our emotions, and that's demonstrable in certainly amongst a lot of young people
yep,
who overuse social media. That there's a demonstrable lack of empathy. They can't actually engage with other people,
yep,
and that's a terrible tragedy. I do think we are sleepwalking
yep.
down a very difficult road of disconnection, and that's why this group that you facilitate is so important, because in a way it runs against that grain. It runs against the grain of social disconnection and fragmentation.
Yeah, yeah. Because if we think about, like, with this workshop we did on Friday night, the three terms were connection, community, and change. And yes, they're buzzwords,
Mm,
but they also have meaning.
mm,
And
yep.
for me, it's to get to the definition of those, I always think about the opposite.
Mm,
So for connection, it's disconnection.
mm, mm,
For community, it's isolation.
mm, mm,
And for change, it's
mm,
stagnation.
mm, mm,
So
mm,
it's kind of looking at the spectrum of those,
mm.
from what they are and then what their opposite is,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
realizing that we can dance along that spectrum
Mm,
between what they're not and what they are.
mm,
It doesn't have to be hanging out at the ends.
mm, mm,
And
mm,
for me, that frees up the rigidity.
mm,
It
mm,
makes it more fluid.
mm, mm. And I suppose, Rick, too, that's very interesting. I suppose, there's an assumption there that even if we are seen or noticed by the other, that we automatically going to get connection. but there is this thing called chemistry, isn't there?
Mm.
And there's the dimensions of personality which we're all drawn to. And I mean, my thing is humor. I'm really drawn to humor, and I'm
Yep.
drawn to certain brands of humor. Often very bawdy humor.
Yeah.
I love people. I don't know what's banter. I love
Yeah.
banter, and
Yep.
partly because I come from the English society where that's a common thing. So, and I'm very, very drawn to humor, and the other thing to a deep kindness, but not what I'd call a kind of projected kindness where somebody claims to be kind,
Yeah.
but something that's exhibited through action. In a manifest
That's
way.
an interesting distinction.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Projected kindness.
Yeah.
Why would people project kindness, do you think?
Well, let me put it. One of my, and God, I hope that the people who I might be describing this, I hope they're not listening. But there are people I met in Mullum who profess to be Buddhists, for example,
Yep.
and they all had all the terminology,
Yep.
and I was absolutely struck by the divergence between what they were talking about and their behaviours.
Yeah, right.
And
Gotcha.
I could never get over it.
Yep.
Like it went on for ages and ages. I think, God, so hang on, you're professing this, but look what you're actually doing now. and so I guess it's that kindness is. I mean, I have to say, I've met a lot of people who claim to be kind, but I've never regarded them as such.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I've met the opposite. I've met people who don't profess to be kind, but their actions are so generous and so kind, and you don't need to be a Buddhist to be kind, right? I mean, your actions and your conscious awareness of the other and their feelings is the most important thing of all.
Yeah, I think that's the pure litmus test, is because you can say one thing and do the other. So it's the actions that really are felt, are acknowledged, if you're telling me you're going to do one thing and you do the other, like I'll see the bit that you're doing rather than what you're saying.
Yeah. That's right.
And then in that gap between the word and the action, there's little layers of mistrust there.
Yeah, it's true. And look, I tell you, I'm doing something. As soon as you said that, my mind went somewhere. Started thinking, and one of the things I was thinking about is, in terms of these disjunctures and the distrust thing too, is one of the things that I felt when I came here was I felt like I was really putting myself out emotionally for people, and it was almost as if I was saying, please engage with me.
Yeah, right.
Please be with me. Please recognize my suffering, and at a very human level, I don't think I could have expressed anything else at the time. But the way that's interpreted by the other is often repulsion, actually. You can repel, but people can walk away and think, oh, that's too much, too needy, whatever they say. And yet, I tell you what that experience has done for me. It's made me much more mindful of people in that position. Like I met somebody today who's absolutely in that position, and I was conscious of it. And I was not repel's too strong a word, but I was kind of a bit reluctant to engage. But I thought, no, this person is in a certain space.
That is the gift of the experience, isn't it?
Yeah, and I need to be mindful of this. I need to be kind here, and the kindness is listening and engaging in whichever way that person is choosing to talk. And I do think there's a kind of, in our society, there's a lack of awareness of that very often.
Yeah.
Because what do we deal with, Rick? You know this. We all deal with each other in the most superficial ways, and often completely out of kilter with who we actually are.
Yeah.
Don't we?
Yeah. That's why I love these conversations.
Yeah.
Because let's just see what's under there and what you believe, what you feel, what are your values. Well, let's have a conversation. Let's have a dialogue.
Yeah.
And to me, this is a really strong form of connection. Yeah. We just take the time to see what emerges from a conversation.
Yeah.
Without it needing to be anything, without it, having an agenda or anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
You used the word kind before.
Mm-hmm.
In regards to noticing someone else in the same situation that you've been in the past.
Mm-hmm.
That word kindness, how effective are you at applying that to yourself?
That's a good question. That's a really good question, actually. It's one of those questions, right? It's one of those questions. You go, oh, hang on, no, too much
I'm
focus. Too
so
much
good
focus.
at doing it for others.
No, yeah, thank you, Rick. Oh, look, kindness myself, yeah. It's yeah. Look, it's fascinating, isn't it? This idea that we have a relationship with ourselves is so confusing for so many people. That because we often conceive of a relationship with another, like my relationship with you, because you're sitting there and I'm here, and this. But the idea we have this relationship with ourselves that invites the question: and what is the self? We could go along that road, but I guess I still have enormous difficulty in engaging with myself in a very constructive kind way.
Yep.
I can be very self-blaming, and push myself to the nth degree, and I can be very unkind to myself. And I was this morning, and I think
What do you get from that?
What do I get from that? That's a good question. I guess it's almost like a chemical expression of what's going in the body at the time. It's like, and I haven't learned that well yet to kind of recognize what's going on bodily and how that's presenting. And today I found myself, I just a little thing. I came into town today. I was looking for some croissants from my very dear friend who I'm sitting with here, saying, because I asked Rick, I don't want your listeners to know that I asked him if he had any biscuits, and he didn't. So I thought, okay, I'll go and get some croissants.
Which anyway, I was happy about.
Yeah. But unfortunately, the shop was shut. And that was enough to trigger something. And yeah, behind it was because I wanted to be an act of kindness for you. I wanted to give you this. I want to say this is because, and it's a nice thing to do, and I respect and like you. And I was so disappointed, but I react by turning on myself. Oh, bloody hell, this place and the traffic, and I hate this place. And it went into that kind of thing. And it was very silly, very irrational. And but I calmed down very quickly. But that's that's a tendency of
that's
me
the loop,
to turn inwards and to sort of catastrophize and so when people talk about self-care, I love these terms. What on earth is self-care? I'd love to know. I know in part we could deconstruct the whole notion of self-care for hours on end.
Yeah. That could be a whole podcast series.
I reckon so. I mean, anybody who's read that book by Bridget Delaney, I think it's called some about wellness and this. She refers to the spiritual industrial complex, and I love that term. And it's like
that's funny.
There is a massive industry around this stuff, how about self-care, and I still struggle with understanding what it is actually. I mean, I can trot out the obvious. Oh, well, you eat well, you do. You go to do yoga. You take time out, you be kind to yourself, and but I'm not absolutely sure what being kind to yourself is. I haven't quite learned that yet. I'm struggling with it.
And would that fit under the category of self-care for you? Of that I'm learning to be kind to myself.
Yeah, I think so. And I think so. I think I've always had this thing about between theory and practice. It's always been a slight disjuncture in my life. Some people describe it as a chasm. If you ask my partner, she says it's a chasm, but it's a sort of chasm, and so I can theorize. I looked at some of my books recently. I've got 60 odd huge boxes of books, and the vast majority of them would be, you might put in the personal growth, self-development, the psychology part of the literary world. And when I look at it, I think, God, I've read all this. How come I'm still in this state? And it's rather like James Hillman wrote a wonderful book about psychology. He said, we've had 100 years of psychology and things are worse than ever. How can this be?
Yeah.
You know that feeling?
Yeah, definitely. No, I am pretty interested about that definition of self-care.
Are you?
Because I think it gets bandied around a lot now, and a lot of it, what I see is the practical, get a massage, take the day off. Like it's the real practical doing. But I think what we're touching on here with like learning to be kinder to ourselves, and the language I like to use is like learning not to turn our back on ourselves. Like to me, that's a pretty, what's the words for it? Appropriate definition of self-care, because in that it's the caring for the mental, emotional dialogue and the knock-on effect of what that dialogue is when it's not healthy
Mm-hmm.
or when it takes over,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
actually acknowledging the impact that has on your life
Mm-hmm.
and your relationships and
Mm-hmm.
in your body, and
Yeah, I think it's just such a powerful point.
Mm.
Such a powerful point, Rick. And I mean, I suppose the person who's really influenced me a lot in that sense. I was about to trot out that word reflexivity. The capacity to reflect, be engage in a reflective process,
Yep.
and listening to those dialogues which are going on through your head is Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now. I think
Yep.
marvelous book, but I've listened to a lot of his podcasts, and the essential message which he's putting across there is, if we talk about presence, about being in this state of bliss and peacefulness, well, part of that is achieved through an increased awareness of what is running through our heads.
Correct.
I love that story he tells. He says, if you're walking down the street and you see a guy talking to himself and berating himself, you go, oh, poor guy, obviously got a mental health problem, needs some help, and it's very sad. And he said, but we do it all the time.
Yeah.
We just don't
It's
vocalize it.
constant.
Yeah, it's constant in our heads. This is what we do,
Mm.
and we have the most bizarre stories running through our heads. Most of them, I think our default position, Eckhart Tolle says the same thing, is our default position is one of negativity. We have this
Yeah.
default to negativity
Yeah.
constantly. And that is exhibited in part through the narratives which are rolling through our head,
Yeah.
which can be very self-destructive. And we've all been there, haven't we?
Yeah. It makes me think about a thing we did in Circle a while ago, and it was the sentence stem of like, what I appreciate about you.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah.
Very well.
And that, like we've said today, like that can feel manageable and doable when you're talking to another human.
Mm-hmm.
Richard, what I appreciate about you is,
Mm-hmm.
off we go. I could go for
Mm-hmm.
days.
Mm-hmm.
What does that dialogue look like when you're talking to yourself?
Well, that's an interesting question. Can I just preface that, my response to that, by saying, when we did that exercise, I remember it, and it really sat with me, because at the time when we did it, I felt this extraordinary sense of self-doubt.
Yep.
My relationships weren't deepening here, and I thought, oh God, what's happening? You get into that narrative, that dialogue, and so when we did that, and we put our hands on each other's shoulders, and they were looking right into your eyes and saying with sincerity, and I found it difficult to contain my emotions around it, because even now when I'm talking about it, I can feel the emotions rising, because another human being is saying, I like this about you.
Yeah.
You're a worthwhile person.
Yeah.
You matter. I care about who you are, And boy, is that the best feeling in the world, right? That's the best
completely.
feeling.
And to the point that you made in regards to Eckhart Tolle and the bias to negativity, and I think that's the grounds to do this type of work and to acknowledge the beauty and the joy in others. But then what we're talking about is like, can we turn that mirror around and actually acknowledge it in ourselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I haven't got a ready answer for that one. Have you got a ready answer for that?
I've been dancing with it. It's not comfortable.
No.
I love doing experiments with my clients. And I won't use any names, and so it's fine.
Yep.
But we did an experiment where I asked them to write a list to themselves of 50 things I love about you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the immediate fear from that request was just like, I will never be able to do that. Like, there's no way.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, let's start with 10. Come back to our next session with
50
10.
sounds quite a lot.
Yeah. But in actual fact, like, it doesn't have to be, amazingly huge things. It could be, I love how you make your partner coffee in the morning. I love there can be the tiniest little things that we don't actually acknowledge in ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was the most interesting experience to see that unfold over a period of a couple of weeks, to get to 50 and be like, I'm actually all right.
Shocker.
But the immediate thought was like, oh, I could never come up with 50.
Yeah. Interesting,
And
isn't
that's
it?
that bias, isn't it?
Do you think it was the figure 50, or do you think it felt so huge for people?
Yeah, it's deliberately there just to be like, oh,
Okay. That's the function of it. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
But we break it up.
Yeah. Interesting. So why do you think that's the case? If indeed it is the case that people have these resistances to, I mean, because a narcissist doesn't have a problem, right? They have a long list, maybe 150 attributes, but why is it that most of us that have this, we have this kind of resistance to that or difficulty?
If I was to take a guess, and it is a guess because I don't know, I'd say it would come down to some level of worthiness that's developed over time, or lack of worthiness. And then if you pair on top the critic jumping in and pointing out when things are not going well, or when the less than desirable behaviors are showing up, if you mix that with a little bit of I'm not worthy unless I'm being validated for doing good things, I think there could be a flavor of that runs. Most people I speak to in my coaching have their version of a worthiness scenario story in their head. There's a real common thread in that, and to varying intensities and degrees and all the rest of it. But it's pretty universal work in regards to really feeling and believing the story of I am enough. You know?
Yeah. I tell you what's running through my mind when you say that is about the validation that people get from other people, and whether the difficulty of saying I am enough feels different to the validation you get through interaction with another being.
I love that you brought this up.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have to get you back on the podcast, Richard. We have a lot to talk about, you and I. I think it's a really good point in the difference between external validation and self-validation. I think we are, in some capacity, culturally programmed to search for external validation. It's in our schooling systems, it's in our work systems, it's everywhere. And I also think that I like to think of them as two ends of the spectrum. So there's self-validation is like, I did that well, I'm enough, whatever the language is. And then there's the external validation of like, you did a really good job there. You're great at that, from someone else. And I think there's a dance between the two. But I think in most people, it's probably 90% external and maybe 5 or 10 self, or it's not existent in self. So it might be, 100 and 0. I think, in my experience, I was lucky enough to work with someone to show me the importance of self-validation. And we worked together, and I got to experience, and this is part of that language around having my own back, where I'm not outsourcing my worthiness to someone else. It's can I acknowledge the parts of me that are valuable and worthy?
Yes.
And not be reliant on someone else to hopefully do that based on the actions that I make. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Look, I'm listening to that very intently, and the reason I am is because it has such resonance for me. I've just realised something. These sorts of conversations, one of the wonders and magic of it is that they hit certain spots.
Yeah.
They push buttons, and things light up. You suddenly get insights into your own life, and the insights I've just had about mine is that when I talk about connection, coming back to that issue about connection, when I leave a conversation, when I leave somebody after a fulfilling, wonderful, sparkling conversation, and I see they're lit up and I'm lit up, for me, it's the best feeling in the world. But it's also got another dimension, which is around the validation I derive from that in terms of my own worthiness, that I have the capacity to make another person feel good in my company. I've never really thought about that, actually. And
this comes into, sorry to derail you there.
Yeah, no.
This comes into Buber and I thou relating. in regards to the collective.
Yeah.
Like this is emerging between us.
Yeah.
It's both of us.
Yeah.
Rather than I'm bringing this and you're bringing this. This is the emergence of what's here.
Yeah.
I think that's really an interesting space to be in.
Yeah.
And one that I'm learning that this podcast benefit from.
Yeah.
Because we don't know where it's going to go. We don't know what's going to emerge.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. On the opposite end of that token, the whole idea of I've always had this terrible resistance to affirmations.
Yeah, same.
Have you?
Yeah.
I just have this vision of people, sitting in their bedrooms, going through self-affirmations and trying to convince themselves through repetition that they're this, that, or the other. And look, I'm not deriding it, and for some people it works and all the rest of it. But for me, I just couldn't buy it. And you've made a really critical point, though. The critical point in this is, independent of one's engagement with other people, is it possible to have a narrative or a sense of being that is essentially underpinned by positive stories about self, or positive validatory accounts of self? And it is interesting, because one of the experiences I've had here in the wake of what psychologists would call dislocation, or sociologists would call dislocation, was when at the pits, I was in the pits thinking, oh, nobody really likes or loves me. Oh my God, what's going on in my life? Oh, how come this is not working? Oh, Jesus, that stuff you get into.
Yeah.
But at the center of it, I started this alternative dialogue. I started saying, Richard, I said, remember, you're actually an okay person. You're lovable. You're likable. You've got a track record of friendships.
Yeah.
And okay, this is happening for whatever reason. This is happening, but inside, I do use that very, I don't know what it is, a clumsy metaphor of a kind of candle that's lit within.
Yeah.
When I was going through my first marriage, a very domestically violent relationship with my partner, I had this notion of the candle that could never be doused.
Yeah.
And I said, it was a provocative thing to say to a very easily provoked person, to say, this is something you can never touch.
Yeah.
And it was true. Like, she could beat, shout, scream, throw things. I knew that candle would remain burning. And so in the darkest of times, I've returned to that here, which has been, look, I'm okay. Actually, at core, I'm a nice person, and I'm a caring, loving person, and I'm fiercely loyal in my friendships.
Yeah.
And they matter to me.
And I think in that there's a knowing of thyself.
Yeah.
Because you do know yourself.
Yeah.
It's the bringing that to the surface and actually speaking to it, just reminding yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's the definition of self-validation.
Yeah. Yeah. Does that apply to you? Does that sense of, the clumsy metaphor of the candle within?
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that, because there's a Ram Dass poem, but now it's a song that I love listening. It's called Sit Around the Fire. And the concept is that through our life, we have a fire, and then it burns down to one ember.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have to protect that ember. Mm-hmm. And through our presence and through our love, we build that ember. And then all we're going to do for the rest of eternity is to sit around the fire. Mm-hmm. And it's the same. We actually use that meditation in our workshop on Friday night, because I just think it's a really beautiful concept of, like, life can sometimes squash our flame, but we can protect it and it can grow again. We don't have to put gas on it. We just have to protect the flame, and then we can sit around the fire.
So there's a little glow in that ember.
Yeah. The ember's just alive, enough to be like, okay, let's rebuild this fire.
Yeah. When you think about that, the power of that metaphor, I tell you where my mind's gone. I mean, and it's a very dramatic place to go.
Yeah.
I saw a film recently with Stephen Fry about when he returns back to Auschwitz.
Yep.
And you may have seen it, but how he returns back to the ruins of the old barracks that he was, housed in. And in terrible, terrible conditions, obviously. And I wonder about people who have that ember inside in most adverse of circumstances. I know that Viktor Frankl, for example, survivor of Auschwitz, and he held on to hope.
I think it's a perfect
hope and meaning. Hope and meaning. So the circumstances around you can be terrible, but somehow inside there's something that sustains us.
Protect that ember.
Yeah, protect that ember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel like we could do an 8-hour podcast.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So let's make this part one.
Yeah. Okay. I look forward to it.
But before we go, I like to ask the question of what's exciting for you right now?
Interesting question. The That's a very interesting question. I'm not sure if exciting is the word, but it's this experience. What it's done for me is to throw up a whole new range of new possibilities in my life, and
This experience being moving up here, or
yeah, the move
yep,
and everything that's gone with it, the dislocation, the flirtation with depression around it,
yep,
the rising anxiety around relationships and place and being. But in all that, there's a new learning and there's a new sense of what's possible in this. And I've even developed the terrible notion of a bucket list, and I've sort of got one, I've spent quite a bit of time thinking about what does that actually mean.
yep,
What sense? How does that fit within my age, within my gender, this place I'm in currently? Why have a bucket list? Like, why do you need that? And I don't refer to it as a bucket list, but that's in effect what it would be known as.
yeah.
So I guess what excites me is the prospect of different ways of being, actually, and actually, of the thing that most excites me of all is my connection, the possibilities of new connections with people.
Yeah.
And I hang on to that. I'm almost with a sense of desperation at times, but cherishing the people I love,
Yeah.
Investing more in that as best I can, and the great excitement of actually being a slightly better person than I am in those relationships.
Yeah. That's really beautiful.
Thank you.
Mm.
Can I ask you the same question?
Yeah. Yeah.
What excites you?
Right now, life's pretty bloody exciting. And I think I mentioned this, whether it was the last podcast or the one before, like I've put myself in situations where there's a lot of connections. So the circle, my study, it's a big group of people, and we do a lot of group work and connecting. And the work down in Melbourne, and I'm excited about the regularity of exposure I'm having to a group and the connections that come from those groups. And knowing that I don't have to manufacture it, I don't have to build it or create it. I just have to be part of it. So I'm excited that I don't have to build something, even though I do like building things. But I'm more excited about being surprised by the connection on the other side, because I'm noticing that more and more. It's like, oh, I didn't expect that. And I'm really excited about that feeling of surprise. And just paying attention to being surprised, pleasantly surprised about, and sometimes not pleasantly surprised, but just being open to and excited about being surprised. Because I see that as the opposite of having an agenda and an outcome. Yeah.
So it sounds like the words come to mind are being with, that you are with this process, you're part of it, integral with it and to it.
Yeah.
And rather than having to reconstruct something new all the time.
Yeah.
It's just present.
Yeah. And I've come to the realization, or I'm coming to the realization more and more, that I actually don't have to be any different than I am now. I don't need to be anything different physically. I don't need to be smarter. I don't need to be, more well read, which is what I used to think. But I'm realizing that I don't have to. I can just show up as me. And maybe this comes back to some of the self-validation stuff of like, I am worthy as I am. I don't need to be continually building and striving in order to feel that. So there's probably a little glimmer of that in there.
That's interesting. And I suspect by the same token, there's that awareness now of when that is happening, when there is a playing up, when there is an acting out.
Yeah.
Okay, and then there's the dialogue, which is about why is this happening
Yeah,
here?
what's going on there?
Why am I? Where is this discomfort coming from? That's always intriguing, isn't it?
Yeah,
We've all got our discomforts.
definitely. And I think the more we can sit with them rather than push them away,
Absolutely.
absolutely, yeah, that's pretty exciting as well.
Absolutely. And from that emerges I think sitting with, that's a whole new topic to discuss, but sitting with something is one of the most powerful things you can do, doing nothing. I'm always reminded, just on a final note, if I may,
Yeah.
a friend of mine who was absolutely in dire straits. His marriage was folding, this was happening, that was happening, and his foreclosing on his house, and he didn't have a job. And he went to see a shaman in Byron Bay, and paid an enormous amount of money about it. And he saw the shaman, and he, through this veil of tears, he turned to the shaman and he said, tell me what to do. And the shaman just looked at him and said, breathe. And he said, is that it?
Is that all I have to do?
I just played you a shitload of money. You're telling me to breathe. I'm already doing that. He goes, no, really breathe.
Yeah.
And, that's one of the great lessons, actually.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot in that we'll unpack next time.
That is a beautiful place to end.
Thank you.
Richard Hil, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Rick. I appreciate it.